Okay, we're just going to
but
go
it's
ahead and get
now a practice.
started.
Stoic acceptance.
Thank you to those who did make it in, and I'm very sorry that the link wasn't correct. That's our bad. We'll have to do due diligence and make sure that going forward we're not just reusing a link for something else. My name is Josie, and I work upstairs in the Adult Services Department. And with me on this call is Penny, and she is the head of Adult Services, and she will be taking care of the chat. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dawn Jacob. She's a graduate student in the philosophy department at University of Colorado Boulder, and she's the coordinator of the Philosophy Outreach Program of Colorado, also known as POPCO. POPCO is a 20-plus year program within the philosophy department that aims to involve those outside the CU community in philosophy. And this program is just a sneak preview of a new library program that we're starting. It's a reading group called Deep Thoughts Philosophy Reading Group. And it's going to be the fourth Monday of every month from 7 to 8:30. And it starts March 22nd. So you can find registration on the Eventbrite page, and then you'll be directed to a separate Zoom channel that they'll use for this reading group. And it's going to be a lot of fun, and Don will talk a little bit more about it later.
Okay, let me take a second, get my screen shared with y'all, since I've got some handy-dandy slides. All right. So I'm going to be talking to you today about Stoicism. So an ancient school of philosophical thought, got its start around 300 BCE and flourished for the next several centuries. Now, I'm going to be looking at stuff mostly in a historical context, and then at the end talking just a little bit about where this has filtered into a more modern version. I think that's a good way to go, just because if you look online, you're going to find a lot of the modern Stoicism stuff. So I want to give you some of that historical context. Now, some people, and I'm definitely one of them, just find it amazingly fascinating all on its own to look at how people in the past thought and lived. I know other people find looking at the history, especially ancient history, mostly as interesting when it promises something for their modern day lives. And I want to encourage you to kind of bring both perspectives to it tonight. So maybe with one ear, listen to the history and try to appreciate it on its own as something historical, but also with your other ear, listen to it as something that might offer you something for your own life or bits and pieces you can take away from it. All right, so you should be able to see it as the slide should have just advanced. So just a quick, what is Stoicism? So again, Stoicism was a prominent philosophical school, started in the late 4th century BCE. If you're not familiar with BCE, that's just very similar to BC and AD. It's just scholars tend to prefer the BCE and the CE notation, but it's kind of interchangeable. So the school really flourished for several hundred years during what's called the Hellenistic period when it got its start. So the name Stoicism itself is kind of interesting because it comes from a word for a location. The word stoa in Greek just means porch. And it got this name because this group of people were meeting to discuss this philosophy on one of these porches, one of these public porches in Athens, particularly the one that was called the Stoa Poikile, the painted stoa. And so you can see kind of a drawing of what this sort of outdoor location would have looked like. One thing that's actually kind of interesting here is this is one of the few schools of ancient philosophy that doesn't draw its name from its founder's name. So kind of interesting that it gets its name instead from the location, the Stoics. So to be a Stoic was to accept the fundamental claims of Stoicism and to structure your life around them. Now, it doesn't mean that people just accepted whatever they were told. It was important, insofar as this was a philosophic school, that Stoics gave reasons and arguments in favor of their claims. And what I'm going to look at tonight at first is what are these claims of Stoicism? What made for this worldview? And I want to start that investigation with an answer to what they thought was a pretty crucial question, what hopefully we all think is a crucial question. The question, how do we live our best lives? Now, the Stoics, like many philosophers of this period, were what we call eudaimonists. That is to say, they thought that human actions were all directed at producing a life that's eudaimon. Now, eudaimon is just a Greek word that we can translate into English as happy. So eudaimon means happy, eudaimonia, we can use as the word for happiness. But one thing you have to keep in mind is this isn't the sort of fleeting happiness that you might get when, I don't know, say the vending machine drops you an extra bag of chips. So what they're after is more of a kind of deep, satisfying, long-lasting happiness, right? The kind that you actually structure your life around. So we do a lot of hard things in life, right? We devote years of our life to schooling. We maybe spend years working overtime to try to get a career established, get up in the middle of the night to take care of kids, eat healthy, work out. And we do this stuff because we want to be happy. But we do a lot of suffering in order to be happy, because that happiness is this kind of deep, satisfying happiness, right? It's not the free extra bag of chips. So that's why sometimes philosophers like to use the word flourishing instead, or just use the Greek word eudaimon. So what makes, though, for this kind of happy life? That's really the crucial question, right? What is it? Is it a bunch of pleasure? Is it fame and fortune? Is it being honest and true? Is it friendship? What is this happy life? Now, the answer to this is going to be a value claim. That is, you answer the question by making a claim about what is most valuable in life, what is truly good. And when you have these different schools of ancient thought, this is how they distinguish themselves and how they answered this value question. The Stoic answer came in two forms, and that's what you can see up on the screen: living in accordance with nature and living a life of virtue. These amount to the same thing, but they give us a little bit different perspectives. You can kind of think of it as living in accordance with nature as being the big picture version, and living a life of virtue as being the little bit more specific, a little bit more actionable version. So a good analogy might be if you go to a dietitian and the dietitian tells you, you need to eat healthy. You're like, okay, well, that's great. Thanks. Like, but what do I do, right? That's very big picture. How do I make it more actionable? And you'd hope for a little bit more specific advice. Maybe the dietitian tells you, you need to reduce your salt intake and eat more veggies. Good, a little bit more specific. That's kind of the relation that these two have. Living in accordance with nature is the very big picture one, and living a life of virtue. And I mean virtue, the sort of things you would think of when you think about what are character virtues: being honest, being just, being courageous, these sorts of things. They'll say that's a little bit the more specific version. All right, so that's our value claim for Stoicism. How do we live our best lives? Well, we live a happy life by living in accordance with nature. In other words, living a life of virtue. Of course, that doesn't give us everything we want to know. So here's three questions that I think we're going to want to tackle. Why think living in accordance with nature is the best thing for us? Why think that's our flourishing life? Okay, and even if we think that, how do we figure out what that is? And even if we know why, we know what it is, how are we supposed to do it? So these three questions outline three different aspects of Stoic philosophy, the kind of full Stoic theory. So Stoic metaphysics, that's going to tell us what the world is actually like. That's their theory about the nature of the world and the nature of humanity. And that, they think, is going to give us the answer as to why we should live in accordance with nature. Well, how do we figure it out? Well, they're going to tell us we need a lot of careful reasoning. And so they're also going to get involved in thinking about logic. What makes for good reasoning as opposed to bad reasoning? And then when you really hit the kind of rubber on the road question, okay, how do we do this? How do we live this way? This is the answer. This is the branch of philosophy called Stoic ethics. So these are three branches of philosophy, Stoic metaphysics, Stoic logic, and Stoic ethics, that are all going to work together to spell out this worldview. The ancient Stoics used this really great analogy of a garden to link it all together. So the metaphysics, the nature of reality, is the garden soil. That's what really prepares everything. And then how we live grows out of it. And we use logic, we use good reasoning as a fence around the garden to keep all the junk out and to make sure that everything that's growing in the garden is growing in the best way possible and not taking any wrong turns. All right, so I'm going to walk through each of these three questions and briefly go over what the Stoics had to say about them so we get the whole picture. So first of all, I know I just put a quote up on the screen, and I know it's nearly irresistible to read a quote as soon as you see it, but I promise you anytime I put a quote up on the screen, I will make sure to read it aloud as well. I'll get to this one in a moment. So I think living in accordance with nature is the best thing for us. The Stoics had this belief that the entire cosmos, that is the entire world, is directed by reason. And sometimes they'll talk about this in terms of a divine mind. They'll call it God, they'll call it Zeus, which I always figure is kind of just like a nice Greek generic term for God. According to them, the goal of this divine mind is to make sure that the entire history and future of the world unfolds in the best way possible. And it turns out that for the cosmos to unfold in the best way possible, it has to contain beings like us, beings who are to a limited extent, have a share in the divine mind's reasoning ability. And so in this worldview, humans have this both elevated and humble status. We're the only living beings that share in the divine capacity for reason. But at the same time, according to the Stoics, our reason is far more limited than that of the divine mind. Given this worldview, they think that to live in accordance with nature means to live as much as we can in harmony with the divine mind's plan for the world. Our purpose in life is to cooperate with the divine mind in the cosmos's perfect unfolding. And so the quote you have up on the screen is this idea put, I think, really beautifully by Princeton philosopher John Cooper in his book, Pursuits of Wisdom. He writes, "The amazing beauty and fantastic good order of the world, playing out over time in accordance with the cosmic plan, is therefore something that concerns us directly, insofar as we are by nature partners of the world mind, indeed subordinate parts of it, in carrying out that plan. And that way the world's good is our good too, just as much as it's God or the world's mind." So this is why they want to say living in accordance with nature is the best thing for us. It has to do with our human nature and its place in this cosmos that's unfolding according to divine reason. All right, so if that handles question one, our second question was, how, according to the Stoics, are we supposed to figure out what is in accordance with nature, right? We need to get even still more specific. Because we can't just read the divine mind, nor can we think like it. So how do we do this? The Stoic answer has two parts. First, careful observation of the natural world, and second, careful use of reason. So imagine we wanted to know what's a natural life for an owl. And I just mean an owl, you know, the nice little nighttime bird. The Stoics would say we could observe an owl over time and see how this natural owl life unfolds. We'll see that there's a hatching, there's some health, some growth, some hunting, some mating, eventually some physical decline and death. And sure, Not all owls live out this full owl life, but we can, by observing, get a sense of what the natural course is for an owl life. And now the Stoics thought we could do something pretty similar with humans, and we could discover what a natural human life is involved. And they'll say if we do this, what they think we figure out is that a natural human life includes bodily health and strength, cooperative relationships with other people, family life, satisfying work, political and social freedom. And of course, actual humans aren't all living out a perfectly natural life. Just like some owls don't get to live their full natural life. Humans don't all get to live our full natural lives. Sometimes our lives are cut short. Sometimes things get affected because maybe I make decisions that result in an unhealthy life, even though an unhealthy life is what's natural for a human. Maybe the decisions of others mean that I grow up under conditions of oppression. Again, that natural life can get curtailed in various ways. And this is why determining what counts as a natural life really takes some careful thinking in addition to that observation. Now, when we reason this way, one thing the Stoics think we'll uncover is that we'll realize that living this life that's appropriate to our nature is living a life that is according to virtue. And that's going to mean for them a life that involves careful thinking aimed at figuring out what's true, wisdom. It's going to involve fair and appropriate interactions with others, justice. So notice one thing they're saying is like, these are parts of human nature. This is what's appropriate for us to seek, is to seek wisdom, to seek fair and appropriate interactions with others, to seek self-control, moderation, and also to seek out courage. And so they think if we aim at living in accordance with these traditional virtues, specifically wisdom, justice, moderation, and courage, we'll be living according to nature. Okay, so we've got a little bit more specific. That's good, right? Our dietitian first told us get a healthy diet. And then our dietitian got a little bit more specific and said, reduce your salt intake and, eat more vegetables. And you might think, look, I need even more specific than that. Don't just tell me eat more veggies. I need a meal plan. And so that's where we're going to tackle this third question, which is how do we actually live it? So for the Stoics, the main item in the meal plan, the prescription for how we manage to live this way according to nature, is going to be what's often called the dichotomy of control. So dichotomy just means, right, something being cut into two parts. So in this case, what they're cutting apart is on one side, what is entirely within my control. And on the other side, what's not entirely within my control. And they're going to say, well, what is entirely within my control? My thoughts and my choices, what I pursue. What's not in my control? The outcomes of those and others' thoughts and actions. I can always decide to do something, but whether that actually gets carried out isn't entirely within my control. And now here's where we really get the beautiful linchpin of the Stoic system. They're going to tell us that the things that are actually good for me, valuable for humans, overlaps perfectly with the things that are entirely within our control. The things that are not entirely within our control aren't in fact things that are good or bad for us. So, and we'll take some time on this. This is such a weird idea to get our minds wrapped around. So according to them, what's actually good for me is thinking and making decisions in accordance with nature. Whether those decisions actually pan out the way I think they will isn't up to me. That's not in my control. So perhaps you decide that you're going to pursue a promotion at work. You've thought about it, and going after the promotion is in line with virtue. It's going to allow you to do some more impactful work. It's going to allow you to better support your family, so you decide to pursue the promotion. Now, regardless of what you do, you might not get that promotion. So maybe a supervisor with a personal vendetta sabotages your efforts. Or maybe the company freezes all promotions due to an economic downturn. Pursuing the promotion was actually good for you and within your control. Getting it wasn't something that was in your control, nor was it something that was good for you. But wait, how do you know? Well, you know it wasn't good for you because it didn't happen. Getting the promotion wasn't in accordance with nature for you on this occasion. It's just not on the list of the things that are actually good for you. That's all that is living in accordance with nature and living virtuously. And that's all about your thoughts and your choices, what you pursue. You live virtuously by pursuing things. Whether you get them is out of your control. And this I find is just the hardest part of Stoicism to really get my mind around. But when we think about it, again, according to them, what's good for us, what's valuable for us, what makes our lives good is a certain psychological orientation to the world. External things like money, prestige, friendship, family, meaningful work, health. Now, those are sometimes the sorts of things we should pursue because as far as we can tell, that's what would be in accordance with nature. But getting or having those things, that's not what's good for us. And so lacking or losing them, also not bad for us. And this is a really challenging way to live. So the Stoic pursues her health as a thing that's worth pursuing. She makes smart dietary choices, she exercises, she makes good lifestyle choices. But if nonetheless she gets diagnosed with an illness and has to start a series of treatments that drain her health, she also is supposed to realize that nothing bad has actually happened to her. All that's good is pursuing, and that's all that's in your control. Okay, so even if we get our minds wrapped around that, why would we possibly think this is supposed to be a happy life? Like, what about this is happy? And here's what they'll tell you. And I think there's really something to this, and I think a lot of contemporary psychology think there's something to this as well. A lot of the stress and anxiety in life, the Stoics thought, came from caring too much about things that are outside of our control, right? So for non-Stoics who think that the goodness of their life depends on things that they have no control over, happiness is never secure, right? Your life can turn bad in an instant. An economic downturn, you lose your job, your life's gone bad. A wildfire, you lose your house, your life's gone bad. A loved one gets sick and dies, your life's gone bad. All these things that can make your life go bad, and you can't prevent them no matter how hard you possibly try. According to the Stoics, that mindset is just going to lead to anxiety and worry, and then upset and despair when these things actually happen. But on the Stoic picture, if you truly believe that your good life consists in pursuing things insofar as they're according to nature and welcoming the outcomes, whatever they are, then having a good life is entirely within your control. It only depends on your thoughts and decisions. It's something that you can get for yourself and you can make secure no matter what the world throws at you. So the Stoic loses any reason to be anxious about what the future holds. So I want to just kind of flesh out a little bit more here to tackle what might be a couple misconceptions. So sometimes when we talk about Stoicism, we think about people who just either have no emotions or have a stiff upper lip. But Stoicism isn't about this. It's, first of all, it's not about hiding your emotions or feelings. And it's not about getting rid of them. It's not about being unfeeling. The Stoics' emotional responses are going to look unusual to us non-Stoics But that's because the Stoic thinks about things in a way that's different from the way most of us do. So if the Stoic loses his house to a wildfire, he's not sad or upset because he believes that nothing truly bad has happened to him. When the Stoic gets a promotion at work, she's not happy or elated about that because nothing truly good has happened. The only thing that's good is virtue, and the Stoic can get that pretty easily. In fact, the Stoic doesn't even fear dying because dying isn't even something truly bad to the Stoic. So one way to think about this is with the phrase, don't cry over spilled milk. I kind of assume the idea behind that is, look, if you spill some milk on the floor, there's nothing there even worth crying for. It's just a little puddle of milk on the floor. Come on. It's not really something bad. So the person who doesn't cry over spilled milk, it's not that they're unfeeling or cold or hiding their feelings. They're just have a kind of right view of the situation. They just realize that nothing worth crying over has happened. For the Stoic, everything other than virtue is just spilled milk. It's not the sort of thing worth being upset for because it's not something truly bad. Now, this doesn't mean, though, the Stoic just sits back and lets whatever happen, or is just a doormat and says, well, whatever happens, I'll just roll with it. That's not quite what Stoics do either. That's another kind of easy misconception. The Stoic accepts the outcomes of the world, but the Stoic also tries to bring about change, right? So what is in accordance with nature is a life under a free political system, not a life under tyranny. And so the Stoics should pursue the virtuous overthrow of tyrannical rule. And in fact, this was put into action by Stoics living in the Roman Empire. So there was a group of Stoics, sometimes referred to as the Stoic opposition, who actively opposed the tyrannical emperors like Nero and Domitian. Of course, whether our efforts at political change are successful isn't up to us. That's not something we have total control over. So if the result of pursuing virtue in political matters is exile, as it was for a lot of members of the Stoic opposition, they welcome that. If the outcome of it is execution, as it was for a number of members of the Stoic opposition, they welcome that outcome as well. What's actually good for us, what makes our life good, is the thoughts and decisions we make in pursuit of justice and freedom. The outcomes we have no control over. It's worth mentioning also just briefly, something that has at least been, I hope, implicit until now. Stoicism is not a selfish or a self-centered way of life. Loving family relationships and community relationships are important parts of a natural human life. And so they're among the types of things we should pursue. So Seneca puts this really nicely. So I'm going to share a quote with you. This is from Seneca's work on clemency. Seneca writes, and Seneca was a Stoic philosopher living during the Roman Empire. Seneca writes, the wise man will do willingly and high-mindedly. By the wise man, he means the Stoic. All that those who feel pity are wont to do. He will dry the tears of others, but will not mingle his own with them. He'll stretch out his hand to the shipwrecked mariner. He'll offer hospitality to the exile and alms to the needy. Not in the offensive way, in which most of those who wish to be thought tender-hearted fling their bounty to those whom they assist and shrink from their touch, but as one man would give another something out of the common stock. He will restore children to their weeping mothers. He will loose the chains of the captive, release the gladiator from his bondage, and even bury the carcass of the criminal. But he will perform all this with a calm mind and unaltered expression of countenance. So this is what the Stoic worldview and the Stoic life is supposed to look like, and a way to get happiness and peace of mind. To be a Stoic, you need to embrace the belief that the only thing truly good for you is virtue, and especially just insofar as it's in your control to pursue it. You must strive to live in accordance with nature and welcome the spilled milk when it happens. Okay, so that sounds easy, right? Just read a little bit of Stoic philosophy and you're done. You should be good to go, right? Just adopt that belief. I mean, gosh, this seems impossible, right? Most of us aren't raised Stoic. We have all sorts of beliefs that we've acquired from a non-Stoic society. And it requires a lot of discipline to distance ourselves from those beliefs and to learn that even though it seems to us that a friend dying is bad, we can nonetheless discipline ourselves to say, this may seem bad and it may look bad to me, but I don't have to accept that it actually is bad. And the Stoics knew that it took a lot of work to convince themselves of this and to actually get this into practice. And so there's a lot of training of your mind in the Stoics to try to ingrain this mindset. So I have up on the screen a quote from Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher from the period of the Roman Empire. This is from his Enchiridion, sometimes just called the Handbook. He says, so make a practice at once of saying to every strong impression, that is when things strike you as being some way, things seem some way. An impression is all you are, not the source of the impression. Then test and assess it with your criteria, but one primarily. Ask, is this something that is or is not in my control? And if it's not one of the things that you control, be ready with the reaction, then it's none of my concern. Notice he says, make a practice of this. It's not easy. The Stoics themselves thought to really get this mindset going, you have to practice this dichotomy of control. You have to practice focusing on what's in your control, noticing what's not in your control. And even when things strike you as being really bad, be willing to step back and say, wait, maybe they just seem that way. And I can convince myself they're not. Epictetus also advises us that one thing we can do to get this mindset is to remind ourselves that a lot of times things aren't going to go as we expect or as we hope, and we can prepare ourselves for that. So I'm going to share with you another quote from the Enchiridion, and I always love this one. I think it's just really fun. Epictetus advises, when you're going to go about any action, remind yourself what nature the action is. If you're going to bathe, and so you might think, again, he's thinking about going to the public Roman baths. So think of it as kind of going to the spa, going to get in a whirlpool with some people. Picture yourself the things that usually happen in the bath. Some people splash the water, some push, some use abusive language, others steal. And thus you'll be more safely able to go about your action if you say to yourself, I will now go bathe and keep my own mind in a state conformable to nature. And in the same matter with regard to every other action. For thus, if any hindrance arises in bathing, you have it ready to say, it was not only to bathe that I desired, but to keep my mind in a state conformable to nature, and I won't keep it if I'm bothered at things that happen. If I get mad at that person splashing water at me, I'm not going to be having the relaxing experience I wanted. And Epictetus thinks sometimes we can prepare ourselves for that, and we should when we can. In short, then, we practice disciplining our thoughts in the hopes that eventually it becomes more natural to detach ourselves from those things that aren't in our control. And the things I've mentioned are just a few of the many techniques that the ancient Stoics employed. On the first meeting of the book group that meets a month from today, on March 22, we're going to be looking at Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Now, Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, and he was a Stoic, a practicing Stoic. Now, in the Meditations, Aurelius doesn't tell us about Stoic theory. He doesn't tell us about Stoic living. The Meditations are his journal, where largely what you see him doing is reminding himself how he's supposed to think about things, reminding himself how to prepare himself for what could happen in life. And so I want to share with you then one of my favorite quotes to him before I jump to the last short section of my presentation. So one thing Aurelius tells us is, he reminds himself and reminds us, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. And then you can be better prepared to deal with that. So The last thing I want to do is just take a few moments to talk to you about modern Stoicism and where you might kind of pick up pieces of this. So Stoicism has become, I mean, it's been popular with, I'd say it's never really gone completely out of fashion since 300 BCE. And right now it's kind of particularly in fashion. And so if that leads you to go looking around online for stuff, there's a lot of cool stuff there. One thing to remember is anyone can call themselves a Stoic, and there might be ways of being more or less Stoic. Hopefully one thing you have today is some background from which you can assess things. Oh, darn, okay, there we go. So in order to be a Stoic, do you need to accept all the parts of Stoicism? I'm going to say not necessarily. Now, Stoicism is designed to be a comprehensive interlocking theory where the pieces reinforce one another. And I'll walk through again kind of maybe the four kind of key points that lock together. And I'm starting with this kind of piece of the pie that's popped off a little bit from the others. And from there, I'm going to go clockwise. So the first thing we want to focus on in Stoicism, one of the key ideas is this dichotomy of control. And the idea that we get relief from anxiety when we practice focusing our efforts and our care only on the things that are in our control. Next, we have the value claim that in doing this, we're able to live well, because the only thing truly good for us is living virtuously in accordance with nature. Moving to the next, so I'm in the bottom left-hand corner. Well, why? Why is this the only thing good for us, according to them? Because we're a part of a cosmos that's ordered by divine reason. And then the last quadrant, well, what about all that stuff that's outside our control? Our attitude, according to them, is one where we should be welcoming. Why? Because everything that actually ends up happening is in accordance with divine reason. So which parts of this are crucial for Stoicism? At least for my part, I think really the first two are. Others might disagree. And I think too, it's the two on the left that people struggle the most with. And especially that a 21st century person might be a little hesitant to adopt. All right, you might think, look, this Stoic idea of God maybe just doesn't fit for you. And maybe that doesn't fit for you because you're a religious person and you have an idea of God that's very different. Maybe this Stoic idea of God doesn't fit for you because you're an atheist or you have no concept of God there. Now, if you're nonetheless attracted to Stoicism, this is where you get a chance to do some philosophizing on your own, because maybe there are other things that can fill in these roles in the theory. For example, what we need is a reason that what is good for us, the only thing actually good for us, is virtue and living in accordance with nature. And maybe you don't want the Stoic God as your explanation for that, but maybe you have a notion of the Christian God, and maybe that can fulfill the same role. I actually think there's a decent space for a kind of Christian Stoicism that fills in those left sides of the quadrant with a Christian God. Perhaps an atheistic worldview can do this as well. I think an atheistic Stoic view is a little bit harder to do. I think it's a little bit more unstable. But there definitely are people who have this view. So there's one modern Stoic who I really respect as a careful philosopher who has this view, Massimo Pilucci. Again, I don't think it's the most stable view, but he defends it and he holds it. I mean, then again, maybe you don't want to be a full-blown Stoic at all, but nonetheless, maybe there's some value to the practices of 1 and 2 and focusing our attention on what's in our control more than those things that aren't in our control. And this is part of what I think is so fun about studying philosophy, right? Sometimes you get these ideas that are just radically foreign to us in some way, but maybe they give us a new perspective on ways to think about our own ways of thinking. And I always find in it too, there's some ways in which it's just shocking how similar the concerns and the questions are that people have across time, and reminding us how human we all are. And yeah, whether those encounters are familiar or they're foreign, I think studying it provides us with all sorts of great ideas and tools that we can use in our own practice of living thoughtfully. So with that said, I hope that some of you will consider joining us on a monthly basis to read and talk about some philosophy. Those meetings are not going to be me talking at you. It will be more us reading some philosophy and coming together to talk about it, what sort of ideas we have. We're going to start on a month from today. It's always nice, February, with that nice, like, very even 4 weeks. So our first session there will be March 22nd. We'll actually be reading and talking about some of Marcus Aurelius's meditations. So you've already got a great head start. And I've got the a short version of the website up there, which will get you to where I have the kind of the readings posted and the reading guides. And now after all of that, I will shut up. And thank you so much. I look forward to some questions. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Thank you, Dawn. This is Penny, and we do have a question from Alex. He said, how did the Stoics relate to the pagan theology of the Roman Empire? Do the Stoics personify divinity, or is it merely virtue?
Great. So there's a little bit of some people are a little unsure about this, but I think, according to my best understanding of it, the Stoics were what you might call pantheists. And they had this actually, so their view is, I mean, even a little wackier than I let on. They want to say that the whole cosmos is an animal, and it's one living being that is an animal that has a body and it has a mind. And so the divine mind is the mind of this world animal. And the physical world, everything you see and touch, those are all some of the physical parts. That's all parts of the body of the animal. And so that's when Cooper says we're actually kind of parts of the divine mind, the divine creature. That's what he means. Like, we're parts of this physical world, which is part of the divine animal that is the world animal. It's kind of a wacky view. And so how did they relate to theology of the Roman Empire? That's a good question. So I don't know in particular if Stoics were resistant to practicing the state religion. My thought would be not necessarily. And in a way, state religion at the time was generally pretty ecumenical. So the state religions were always kind of taking on new gods and always welcoming things in. And I know people who have a background might think, but wait, wasn't there a lot of conflict with Christianity? And yeah, because monotheism, that was really, really weird to the state religion. But yeah, I can't say for sure if they were resistant to practicing the state religion. I don't have any reason to think they were harshly opposed to it. And the Stoic line would more be, you know what, just if what is accordance with nature and kind of promotes community is to go along with these public festivals and engage in the public festivals and practices, go ahead and do that.
All right, and then from Nate, we have, do Stoics praise endurance of pain?
So they're not gonna praise it as something good because it's not good, right? The only thing that's good for you is virtue. But they do, so this was one thing I actually ended up leaving out there that I thought about mentioning. So they do sometimes have this, as far as I said, they recommend all these different practices for really kind of getting your mind in the Stoic mindset. So one practice they'll recommend is doing things that are slightly painful. So going outside for a walk without your jacket, or eating smaller meals than usual, or sleeping on a really hard mattress, or, like, you know, sleeping on the floor for a night instead of your bed. And they'll say you should do that once in a while, because that helps train yourself to realize, you know what, being a little bit uncomfortable isn't bad. Why do I get this thought sometimes that, oh my gosh, it's going to be the worst thing in the world if my back's a little bit sore. Oh, it's going to be the worst thing in the world if I miss a meal. They'll say, no, do it once in a while to train yourself that, no, those things aren't really bad.
Oh, and now we have another one. Is Stoicism similar to the concept of detachment? That one's from Josie.
Cool, thanks. So Josie, can you tell me maybe really quickly what you mean by detachment, just so I'm on the same page as you?
Yeah, it was kind of a concept in early sort of medieval mythology in Egypt that you didn't sort of you were at peace with whatever happened. You didn't try and make something happen or anticipate what was going to happen.
Okay, cool.
Or attached to like an outcome, I guess.
Yeah. So that's where I think too they're kind of walking this really fine line that they're going to say, yeah, you can't be attached to any outcome, and one, it's not going to be good for you because it's not within your control, or it's not going to be smart for you too. You're going to cause yourself some pain because that's not within your control. And I think maybe I'm not sure who else shares the view as well as adding on to that. And what happens is the outcome is neither good nor bad for you. And then the fine line they walk is that full-hearted pursuit, though. It's not that you don't start that detachment before the outcome occurs. Before the outcome occurs, your pursuit is wholehearted. So you don't just go like, oh, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll be okay with whatever it is. So I'll just sit here and wait for it to happen. They're like, no, virtue tells you you should be trying to do things. And so what you have to do for virtue is go try to do those things. But then detach yourself from the outcome of it, which is such a weird, difficult position to have. Because I think that's really hard to put those together. The wholehearted pursuit and yet but when it comes to the outcome, I'll accept what happens.
Okay. And Brody asks, were there significant disagreements among the Stoics about what was virtue, or what was in accordance with nature?
Awesome. So I don't know of anything that I would say is a significant disagreement. It's not like you'd have one Stoic say compassion is in accordance with nature and another rejects that. On kind of all the big points, they're all going to be in line, and they're all in line that it's going to involve virtue and characterizing virtue in terms of wisdom, justice, self-control, and courage. And then different Stoics will drill down into those more. And so you'll get people discussing, like, maybe there are 5 different forms of justice that kind of talk about little different aspects of it. And as far as these more fine-grained disagreements, I'm going to say I don't know enough about them to kind of give you one offhand. But it would be completely in line with the kind of, reading was just reoccurring to me. It's completely in line with the Stoic way of doing things, and this being a philosophical school, that they welcome that debate, they welcome that discussion of it. And so I was just thinking of this part in Epictetus's Discourses, where he talks about having a disagreement with something about what should be done. And his answer is, look, that's for you to determine. Like, I can't just tell you like what's in accordance with nature. You need to determine that and come to that on your own. And which I think, at least the way I read it, leaves some space for, yeah, there might be reasonable disagreement about some of those things. But yeah, sorry, I don't have any kind of cool disagreements I could give you off the top of my head. But even if there were, I don't think they're going to be super interesting ones.
Thank you. So, and then Alex asks, can you talk about the Stoic impulse to serve the common good? Didn't Marcus directly address this in Meditations?
Yeah, so this comes up in Marcus's Meditations. This comes up in Epictetus's writings. This comes up in Musonius Rufus. This is kind of there throughout, the serving of the common good. Because part of what they think of when we look at human nature and what is it to be human, you're going to see that we're all, so maybe there's two things I want to say here. They're going to say, one, that part of what's in accordance with human nature is connection and social connection and family and love for others. And sometimes this idea, the term for it that you see in the literature is Stoic cosmopolitanism. But the idea being that if you look sort of a city of the world, as the kind of literally, the Greek word literally means, that we all share in this reason. When it comes to what's essential to human nature, they're going to say we've all got it. We've all got the same thing. And so we should all be in pursuit of the same sort of life for all of us. So it's not like I deserve freedom and you don't because I live in this city and you live in a different one. It's no, what's key is our shared human nature, which for all of us, the natural life is one of freedom. So yeah, so this is often called cosmopolitanism, or I think it's, there's another Greek word, I'm just gonna botch the end of it if I try to say it. And so one thing I mentioned, I got one question privately real quick, which is there a sense of determinism in Stoicism? Yeah, actually, totally. So they think everything is determined. And that's one thing I think most modern Stoics don't, they reject that as a metaphysical view of the world. But the Stoics themselves did believe that. And you might think, well, wait, then why should we do anything? Why should we wholeheartedly pursue anything if it's all determined? Yeah, so they walk this other really fine line, which is they want to say that the world being determined is compatible with us having free will. So they'll tell you, like, yep, we've got free will. And yep, everything is determined. And you might think, that doesn't make a lot of sense together. And about half of philosophers would agree with you. And the other half, including the Stoics, would say, no, we can make sense of that. But that's a whole long discourse on its own, which I'd be happy to recommend some cool stuff to read on.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure if there was some people chatting on the side, because there was a comment from Brody, and then afterwards he said, "Sorry, wrong chat." So do you want me to read this out loud, Brody?
Me and Stefan were chatting each other on the side, and I mischatted. So apologies.
Okay. All right. Then we'll skip that one. And there's Alex to say thank you. And I don't see any other questions at this time. So last call.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just give, if people are more interested. Oh, I was going to write in the chat.
Oh, sorry. The one real quick.
Oh, sure.
Laura did ask, how do we sign up and prepare for the March 22nd reading group?
Great. So on the library website, you'll find there an Eventbrite registration, but you can also go to, oh, there. I just finally learned how to chat. Let me type this, bit.ly/phil-reading-group. This should be correct. Let me make sure I got the right one. Darn it, it will not. Okay, so we'll get that sorted for you in a moment. I thought I typed it in correctly, but maybe I didn't. But we'll get you, there's also a Google, thank you. There's also so that will take you to a Google site. And once you're there, that's where I have up all of the details about what we'll be reading. There's reading guides and so forth. And that will also have a link back to the library site for registering. And then if people are interested in learning more about Stoic philosophy, I really recommend this book called The Stoic Life by Tad Brennan. It will cover the kind of philosophy, this kind of full background of it, not just the how do you live it, how do you do it. And he has really nice sections covering the determinism and free will stuff. So this will get you digging into the philosophy. Although it tackles the philosophy, but I also say it's written really clearly and accessibly. And Tad he's a wonderful writer. And so I think this book is pretty accessible for people who are still kind of new to it. So I highly recommend that. And for people who are more interested in how do you live it or how might you be a modern Stoic, I recommend almost anything by Massimo Pilucci. And there's a good chance I've left out a letter or two in his name. I know there's a chi in there, and I know I've got two C's at the end, but I've probably messed up something in the middle. He is a contemporary philosopher and scientist. I think he was a biologist and then eventually started studying philosophy, got a second PhD in philosophy, started doing philosophy of science, got interested in Stoicism, and has a ton of books on like how to live a Stoic life. But also really sensitive to how you might do this stuff as a 21st century person, but also sensitive to the philosophical points.
Okay, I think that's it for questions. Josie, did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you so much, Dawn. It was very interesting, and we'll hopefully see you guys at the reading group.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. Nice to see everyone.